Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Archetypal Radio. I'm your host. Little housekeeping. I want to advertise and put out into the ether that my coaching services are available. Um, Working mostly with dreams, and dream coaching is my specialty. I've been working with my own dreams for a few years, and if you've been listening to the podcast, you have gotten some insight into that, or if you've read my articles. But I believe that dreams are a gateway into being able to look at yourself through a very honest lens, and a lens that's made particularly and specifically for you. And that is kind of manifested as a result of your own conscious actions and consciousness. Um, and so, wherever stage you are at in your relationship to your dreams, whether you're not dreaming at all, whether you have dreams but you're just kind of mystified by them, I can lend you some support in an area. I can help you begin to remember your dreams better, and I can help you kind of understand the language in which they speak to and help you develop your own understanding of the language that it's developed for you, because there's no right system. There's no way to just make a rote interpretation. But that's where having the help of a coach can really be beneficial. And you can elicit my services via my website at mysticalrevival.com under the About the Work section. And feel free to contact me at mysticalrevival@gmail.com for more information. Today's episode is going to be an extension of an article that I wrote a couple of weeks ago, on the nature of depression and narcissism. This is something that I have a great deal of personal experience with, in my own kind of experience, my own psychology. And it's something that, of course, as a clinical psychologist in training, that I encounter a lot. Depression is, of course, one of the most common mental health diagnoses in the United States and in the industrialized, civilized world, with roughly about 1 in 7 people experiencing a major depressive episode every year. And it's a very difficult and tricky thing to encounter. It's pernicious, it's excruciating, and it's just, all in all, just a drain on energy. And it's something that I think is preventable and escapable. And that's kind of what we're going to get into today. And that's not to say that, of course, that's what I'm talking about with regards to like it being excruciating. It's a difficult thing, and I do not mean to in any way invalidate or lessen the experience of those who are actively depressed or have even kind of gone through the final solution, which is suicide. That's not to denigrate those individuals at all. That's a choice that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. It was at one point the only solution that I could see, and I was very torn apart by that. But I'll get into that as we go throughout this episode. So I'll kind of start out talking about just the nature of depression, kind of what it looks like, how it tends to increase in severity as time goes on, due to its kind of ruminative nature, and self-fulfilling prophecy of badness, of unworthiness. I'll go into my own journey, and kind of like the factors that formed me and why I was open to depression, why I was really vulnerable to depression, and just give a very earnest account of my journey through that and what it's been like, because it hasn't been a clear-cut journey upward through to healing and to feeling like I am worthy of cosmic love or of my own love and admiration. It's been a pretty kind of, as things tend to go, hills and valleys, sine wave kind of experience. And then at the final part of this episode, we'll go into talking about suicide. We're going to kind of riff around on that a little bit in terms of just kind of the statistics, how people tend to do it, what kind of the metaphysical views on suicide, I know those are going to be pretty controversial, but I think that's a really great topic to discuss, um, and also provide resources for those that are experiencing suicide as the only solution to their problems. And I'll kind of wrap this up with a discussion of David Foster Wallace, who's a favorite author of mine. You can actually see his giant tome here in the corner here. Infinite Jest, one of my favorite books ever. And we'll kind of talk about his "This Is Water" speech and his subsequent suicide several years later. But yeah, welcome to Archetypal Radio. It's a pleasure to have you all here today, and let's talk depression. Of course, this is going to be very heavy material for some people, and I just want to stipulate, we are going to be talking about, the act of killing oneself. And I know that there's people listening to this who have experienced someone close to them committing suicide. And I just want to reach my heart out to those that have experienced that and have had to bear the just unfathomable pain of someone that they care about, feeling so isolated, feeling so hopeless that suicide was the means by which they chose to end their suffering. So do whatever you need to take care of yourself throughout this episode, and just know that we're going to be talking about those heavy subjects. And so, like I said before, depression is something that's very common in the Western industrialized world. 1 in 7 people experience a major depressive episode each year. And of course, there's chronic depression that occurs, which can be even more tricky. And that's kind of the slippery slope that tends to manifest in terms of there's some dark seed of masochistic pleasure or just of unworthiness or or self-criticality of, I should be better, or I should be smarter, I should be more fit, I should be whatever the comparison is that you're making. And depression is a way to kind of cope with all of that. It is a response to things feeling unfair, to feeling like there's no movement or momentum going on, as a response to, because we're always making meaning out of things, right? Whether we're recognizing it or not. And there's parts of us that are making meaning linguistically, right? Through words, through thinking. And there's parts of us that are making meaning through feeling and through images and experiences. And that's the part where we kind of get cut off in our society, our culture, particularly if you're a male. I believe, not that females aren't subject to this, but we tend to like to get up in our towers and kind of distance ourselves from everything. And depression affects men and women in about equal numbers. Men do tend to experience it a little bit more often. And men, of course, are more likely to complete a suicide, i.e., successfully commit suicide, and women are more likely to attempt suicide, but not quite as likely to complete it. But we'll get into all of that. And so depression, it's just, from my own experience, it's a complete black hole of a feeling like nothing is ever going to get better, that the issue is with you, and because the issue is with you, that what hope is there? I'm seeking to improve. The thing that I want to improve is the thing that I'm trying to do the improving with, and that's in and of itself kind of a paradox or a self-defeating mechanism. And the reason why I'm tying in the article, my article is on depression and narcissism, reclaiming a healthy sense of self through self-admiration. And with depression, and again, this is one of the most difficult things about working with people with depression, is that everything becomes an opportunity for self-denigration. Any consolation offered, any recognition of how things could be better is it just all gets wrapped up into that narrative of I'm bad, I can't get better, I don't deserve to get better, I'm unworthy, I don't deserve to be loved, I don't love myself. And that's kind of like the core issue is that I don't love myself. And that's something that we have to learn how to give to ourselves in a healthy way. And when you're depressed, there's a way in which that feels very repulsive. I know, particularly when I was depressed, I really, there was like a shadow element that would come out with me towards people that could, that could be proud of themselves, that could speak about themselves in an admirable light and kind of like brag a little bit. I couldn't stand people that could brag. Um, and with those sort of mechanisms, that's always kind of the root. Whatever repulses you or whatever activates you in that way is the signpost of where you need to go and what you need to move towards. Um, and so if you're depressed, there's kind of this overall feeling of, affective deadness. You don't really feel much. There's kind of a, I'm going to throw out some jargon in here, but I will explain it. Anhedonia, or the inability to feel pleasure towards anything, things that you usually find pleasurable, like even like, your favorite hobbies or activities like playing video games, going hiking, drawing, writing, whatever the case might be, just feels very, feels like you don't derive any joy from it. Um, and there's a just, the deadness kind of permeates you to the extent of like, there's nothing that piques my interest. There's nothing that lights the fire inside of me, no matter what I do. And so, I'm just going to either engage in these kind of passive activities like scrolling through Instagram or watching television, and use those as kind of a salve or a balm. Um, but there's also that sense too of just being totally catatonic, where people will just lie in bed. I have just lied in bed for hours thinking, this sucks. I hate this, and there's nothing I can do about it. And whenever you're in this state, there are kind of no secrets within the unconscious, right? This feeling that you have of yourself as an unworthy being, as someone that doesn't deserve love, that doesn't deserve communion with other human beings, that you feel like a blight upon nature, or just like the most unworthy. This is kind of getting at that shadow narcissism of just like, I am the most bad, I am terrible, horrible, there is no hope for me, because I'm so wretched. That's that kind of shadow narcissism of like aggrandizing the badness of yourself. And in psychology, with narcissistic personality disorder, we would call it the grandiose self, right? That need to prop up this image of just like total omnipotence or power, omniscience, and everything that goes wrong is not within here, it's within the other people in my purview, and it's just because I'm so great that I have all of these bad interactions, or I have these difficulties in my interpersonal life. And with depression, it's the equal and opposite of that. It's the Instead of the badness all being out there, it's all inside. It's all within your own heart. All of the world's problems, all of my interpersonal difficulties are my fault. And these are both equally pathological, equally untrue, right? Points of view, because of course there is no absolute, it's all out there, or it's all in here. It's always a mixture of both. And right. Um, Not only is it both, but there's something else that's going on. And so with the kind of like, so if we call that the grandiose self in narcissism, this is what I refer to as the atrocious self in depression. And when you are in that state, of course, all of the any opportunity that you have to have a positive social interaction, or get admiration from a professor or teacher, mentor, whatever it might be, all of those opportunities tend to get passed over, or you tend to self-sabotage within the moment. And that's what can be so just absolutely infuriating, and kind of reinforce that narrative of just like, what the fuck, like I want to get better, I know I want to get better, but every time I, you know, every time I like someone comes up to me and says hello, I freeze up and I, I get inside my own head and I think, oh God, is this person going to like me? Are they going to see how bad I am? Um, are they going to be interested? Can I get my admiration from somewhere other than within my own experience? And of course, making that search is always going to be fruitless because, of course, you have to be able to give that admiration to yourself before others will give it to you. Jim Carrey has a beautiful, beautiful way of putting this that if you're striving for attention, you will be invisible in this world. And so that you get into these kind of cycles of like, I'm so bad, and you tend to isolate, you tend to not engage because you get reinforced through your interactions that you are bad, that people don't find you interesting, that there's nothing interesting to find about yourself. You get locked into that self narrative, right? Of, I am uninteresting, I am unworthy. And so I'm going to, instead of, permitting myself to be vulnerable and just open up and not have expectations of how this interaction is going to go. I already expect it to go poorly, to kind of give this person a bad taste in their mouth when they leave the conversation, or whatever the case might be, right? And so that gets reinforced and reinforced and reinforced, and you tend to isolate and you tend to look for other ways to derive some sort of sense of satisfaction. And that's a lot of times through certain addictions. That can be put through pornography, that can be through drugs, that can be through cannabis, alcohol, opioids, opiates, methamphetamine, whatever it might be. Um, those are all very powerful pharmacological means of deriving that sense of kind of like self-satisfaction or self-pleasure. Um, and this is working neurologically. And of course, the medical institution will largely say, that this is a chemical imbalance within the brain, and that it can be treated pharmacologically. But the studies indicate that that's not the case. If you just give people, right, antidepressants, their rates of getting better are about 33%, which is pretty abysmal. And it's not, at least it has that. But if you combine that with a psychotherapy treatment, if you combine medication and a psychotherapy treatment, it goes up to over 70%. And so it's not just a chemical imbalance, right? Of course, there is a chemical imbalance present, but it's not a result. It's that kind of feeding in, feeding out, right? Through your interactions, you're creating these feedback loops, and that's leading to a chemical imbalance or a disruption in your serotonin system at a very basic level, right? Because these things are all so complicated. It's not just serotonin, it's also norepinephrine, which is related to arousal. It's related to dopamine, which is related to motivation and pleasure, right? It's related to acetylcholine. It's everything and more that we don't know. So you cannot trace it to just a root cause biomedical pharmacological means. Of course, people that are depressed are experiencing chemical imbalances, but it is not because of the chemical imbalances that they're experiencing depression. They're experiencing depression and having chemical imbalances that are indicative of that. And even through just behavioral adjustment and through shift in self-concept, cognitive frames, schemas, all of that, you will actually see a natural improvement or a natural change within the neurochemistry, the neuroelectrophysiology of the brain, and that's why certain treatments can work really well. I think that's why the psychedelic space is so interesting and fantastic, because with regards to ketamine is a very potent kind of acute antidepressant treatment. It's one of those ones where it is kind of a neurological reset, because people tend to need booster shots about every 6 to 8 weeks or so with ketamine, and that's without any sort of therapeutic intervention or relational intervention. Um, and so that's fairly interesting in terms of, excuse me, um, what happens with ketamine is it is a glutamate antagonist. As a non-competitive glutamate antagonist, which means that there is a site on the glutamate receptor. It doesn't compete for glutamate at the receptor site. It has its own receptor site, and it antagonizes it, i.e., it shuts that receptor. It makes its activity less. So here, ketamine comes into the receptor up here, and then boom, closes. And these are all glutamate receptors are everywhere. That's the most common excitatory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. And those are all the NMDA receptors are glutamate receptors, and those are kind of linked to self-concept, to memory formation, consolidation. And so what happens in the ketamine experience, at least, of course, if you give them a flood dose, if you're giving them an anesthetic dose, then they'll lose consciousness entirely, and just be totally dissociated, right? But if you give them sub-anesthetic doses and you go into those K-hole experiences or these kind of dissociated out-of-body experiences, then there's a separation that occurs between one's own consciousness and the typical, right, neuroemanations that are going on up here. And with regards to suicide, that's, why it's so interesting that most people do tend to shoot themselves in the head, not only because of its lethality, but because this is kind of like the identified patient within the individual person, right? It's this thinking head that's doing all of the damage, and with every suicide, it's an act of rage, right? It's an act of rage towards people that are around them. It's an act of rage towards the self, and it's saying, I'm going to kill this terrible master of mine, because of course ego is a great servant but a terrible master. And so you can see where it gets really tricky, and why we need to have a great deal of compassion for people that do end up in a depressed state, because it is something that is so difficult to climb out of. It feels like you're climbing out of a conical swimming pool with petroleum jelly all over it, right? It just feels like you cannot get any friction on it. And so I'll use my own experience to kind of highlight these things, and show, what made me vulnerable to experiencing depression, towards experiencing suicidal ideation, to thinking about killing myself, and why that brought a certain sense of peace or pleasure or whatever it might be. But from my earliest experiences, I can always remember just trying to be very exceptional. My father likes to tell me the story of when I was 6 years old in the first grade. There was a bunch of commotion that went on in my bedroom, and he came in there, and my eyes were kind of fixated on the trash can. And so he went over there to investigate. I said, no, please don't look in there. Please don't look in there. He's like, well, now I have to look in there. And what he found were the ripped up remains of a spelling test on which I had scored a 98%. And so that's kind of like that, like I'm talking about, that initial seed, very narcissistic aspirations. Like, I have to be perfect, right? And this isn't something that I think that my folks really like try to instill in me. Of course, they wanted me to do well, and they had a high standard for what would be acceptable. But I also feel through my own experiences and through the experiences of my siblings that their love is unconditional, as unconditional as any human being can offer. But to be perfectly honest, I think I just kind of picked this. I think I picked this up from just from the culture at large. Not saying that it's an aberration, but it was, I can trace it to Dexter's Laboratory. If anyone remembers that old cartoon show about this young boy who's very who's very intelligent and who spends all of his time in his lab, and I can kind of remember he gets like he misses like one question on a test, and like the camera focuses in, and he's just like, his whole self-concept is being shaken of this kind of perfect intellect that he aspires to. And so that was something that was very much present within me. as far as I don't know exactly what that is. I can kind of relate it to my impression of Catholicism, and just that that you are that God is the only right source of light, and everything about God is good, and it is by the grace of God that you have any goodness within you at all, and of course your own contribution is the indigenous body, evil, sexuality, greed, all of those things. Those are all part of you. Those don't have anything to do with God. Um, and so, my identity was very much based on performance and achievement. And I had to destroy evidence, right, of any evidence to the contrary. And so, this kind of continues. And of course, my folks got divorced when I was just on the cusp of 14, and had a very, close relationship with my mother. My father was he worked quite a bit when I was young, and my mother had she had moved to Austin, Texas from San Jose, and was felt very alone. And dad, worked nights, and he was still a young man at the time as well. Both my parents are fairly young. And so my mother and I developed a very close relationship. And of course, whenever the divorce occurred, there was this kind of that narcissistic viewpoint, right? And we need to talk about that narcissistic viewpoint because it gets that connotation of like, oh, you're a narcissist or you're narcissistic, like that's bad, right? And you're kind of hopefully starting to see this theme emerge throughout this broadcast in terms of labeling things as all bad or all good, or and not being able to see the complexity in between, and that that i.e. it's we can't get around the fact that we're narcissistic. Right now, I am giving this talk using my voice on this microphone in front of me. I can see myself on my screen, on my desk, in my home. This limited perspective that we have is a tremendous gift because it's what allows us to be able to move about through this physical plane and be able to meet our own needs, i.e., needs for food, shelter, water, love, companionship. When we need to urinate and defecate, right? When we want to fuck, when all of these things. And we really need that aspect of it, and we can't get around it. And we also can't get around having power as human beings, as divine spiritual beings incarnated within this beautiful world. And that's something that comes up in depression a lot too, is that feeling of powerlessness, like you can't do anything. But I can very much assure you, and this is speaking to me, this is speaking to people that I've worked with, this is speaking to friends that I know that struggle with these same sort of issues. There is a power that you're using, and you cannot get around it as a human being. As a human being incarnated within this world, you exercise power, and there is no such thing as a powerless human. There's no such thing as a powerless individual. There are, of course, ways in which society accrues power and uses it to impede other groups based on whatever it might be. In the United States, of course, there's the longstanding tradition and history of racism, stemming from, of course, using Black Americans as a means to bolster the economy through slavery, right? And then, of course, that kind of like security that position of superiority brings. And of course, whenever slavery was formally disbanded after the Civil War, racism continued to be a part of this system, and you cannot get around that. That's something that I will put a firm stance in. I think that as far as like what we do about that is a very complicated conversation that needs to be had between all of our citizens. But white America was not going to allow these people who had once been owned and seen as equivalent to livestock or worse in some cases. They were not going to let that go. They were not going to let go of this feeling of superiority, and that's the Jim Crow laws afterwards. This is instantiated in the culture quite a bit, I think. The 1921 Tulsa Massacre in which an affluent Black neighborhood was razed to the ground, literally. This is something, I didn't find out until this year, 2021, 100 years after it had happened. This is something that was never taught in schools. And there's a way in which, of course, that this is meant to divide us, but that needs to be recognized in terms of, there was a place where the Black community was doing really well, and the white Americans in that area just could not tolerate that, and showed their own evil and badness by murdering and killing and raping and burning this town to the ground. And I'll also cite the example of Nation's Pride, one of the first silent films, came out, I believe, in 1929. This is actually quite an interesting story as well, in terms of the plot of Nation's Pride is that this escaped slave is on the loose, and it's of course a white man in blackface, and he attempts to rape a white woman, and the white woman, you know, to preserve her sanctity, throws herself off a cliff, and is kind of marked as a hero. And then the film is about chasing this Black man. And if you see reels of this film, this is where George Romero gets the inspiration for his zombies in the film, The Night of the Living Dead, the classic beginning of the zombie movement, because it's uncanny. The way that this Black man is portrayed in Nation's Pride is very much as a kind of like like that. It's disgusting to watch, and of course George Romero alchemizes this into the zombie genre, and it's no coincidence, and I think it was very intentional on the part of George A. Romero that this film stars the first African American male lead in U.S. history, and of course he's the last one standing at the end of all of this, and he's still shot by the authorities at the film's conclusion. Spoiler alert, sorry, but the film's 60 years old, so sorry or not sorry, y'all. I know that was a bit of a tangent, but it felt important to kind of discuss how that happens. But and so coming back to my own experience, having this identity based on performance and achievement meant that there was always kind of a shaky foundation, that there would always be something I would have to do to earn my own admiration, or get the admiration of my parents or my teachers or society writ large, whatever it might be. It depended on something other than my own innate being. And so, I did fairly well in school. I was fairly motivated, and, I didn't really, try too hard. This is again, kind of that concretization of how things get solidified and how the separation tends to polarize and separate even further until that energy comes back. But I took AP classes, and it just struck me as like, why would you not take AP classes? I don't know what the rules were governing, advanced placement classes in other parts of the country, but our school graded AP classes on a 6.0 scale. And so to me, I was just like, well, why would I not take an AP class? I can get a C in an AP class and, make a 4.0. And, with the students that were taking regular classes, that the highest they could get was a 4.0, and that's if they get an A. And that's it's not the best. It's a classist way to operate, and not necessarily achievement based. And but I did well. My marks were good. I was able to go to a state school on full scholarship, as a result of my extracurricular activities, as a result of my grades, and also get another scholarship because I was wanting to become a physician at the time. And so my self-concept was pretty good. I was like, oh, my metrics are fulfilled. I'm doing well in school. My teachers admire me. My parents admire me. the institutions want me to be there, and so that felt really good. And of course, college is a whole different ballgame than secondary school is, because you actually do have to know how to learn, and that's something that I really struggled with in my first few years. I didn't do too like first semester was pretty good. I had some shakes to the foundation, and my study skills were not great. I couldn't hold my attention for very long. I was kind of like trying to rote memorize everything, and instead of actually trying to link it to things that I already did know, um, creating new landscapes, maps. I was just trying to write everything down essentially and remember it. Just remember it. Why can't you remember it? Um, and so this was setting me up for failure essentially. And after my freshman year, I was put on academic probation and would need to get my grades up in order to retain my scholarship. Um, and all this while, I just I never changed the underlying cause, which was the fact that my study habits were needed improvement. And I had this kind of hubris of myself as a smart, intelligent individual, and I don't need to do those things. Everything should be okay, and if I want to maintain the image of myself as an intelligent person, the intelligent person doesn't have to try very hard to do well in school, right? This is what I've been reinforced with for the 15 years prior. Um, and of course, that's just simply not the case. And I was very much wrapped up in this sense of being an intelligent person, and I believe that everyone has intelligence, like incredible intelligence in particular domains, and I think the way that that manifests is different, in terms of some people are very kinesthetically uh, intelligent in terms of like they know how to move their body, they know how to they can put an arrow right where they want to. They can put a shot right where they want to. They can um, move through the air, whatever it might be. There's people that are very emotionally intelligent and can pick up on the feel of the room. And then there's of course people that kind of go by that same rote definition of intelligence of being very book smart, being able to recite facts or have understanding or develop novel ideas, develop abstract ideas, all of these things. And so this was a big hit to my self-concept. So I was like, well, I became more interested in preserving this image of myself as an intelligent person rather than having the humility to say, okay, I am an intelligent person, but uh, I'm not doing as well in my courses as I would like to. Um, and so what do I do? Well, if I want to maintain that image, I can't change what I'm doing, right? I can't change my study habits because I've already figured those out. I already know what to do. So now the case becomes like, well, maybe it's something to do with me. Maybe there's some inherent flaw in my psychic makeup that makes it to where I can't do this, to where I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy of these marks. I'm not worthy of the self-respect that, I've given myself based on the achievements that I've done in the past. And that continued to kind of spiral, to the point where in 2013, I kind of came off and on academic probation during my time at university. And um, in October of 2013, I was in danger of failing physics, and if I failed physics, then I was going to lose my scholarship, and that was going to kind of be the end for me, essentially, right? And that was just an intolerable idea, and I'd already been, from about 2011 to 2013, kind of playing around with these ideas of like, you know, I'm deficient. I can't do this, instead of trying to change the mode by which I operated in the world. And I was looking for admiration everywhere except within my own heart. From my fraternity brothers, from girls, from professors and peers, right? And and pornography for sure. And it just continued to spiral. That year, I just remember, I spent more more or less of 6 months contemplating every day, thinking about killing myself, because it was just like I feel so wretched and awful that that I don't know what to do. I don't know how to change. I seem to be unwilling to change, and I'm not capable of changing. And again, this is all wrapping up and staying in that self image of I'm an intelligent person that doesn't need to try to do well in school. And that's the narcissism. That's the um, and it's not owned, right? I wasn't saying like, you know what, I'm being a prick and like thinking that I'm above all of these other people who, like a good example was my roommate in college who was just an absolutely brilliant guy, and I had this perception of him as someone also that didn't try. But of course he worked quite hard. It was just how he approached things, and he had fun doing it. And so like, yeah, he made like top marks in OChem 1 and 2, and people were just like astounded by this. And he's like, it's not like I don't study, right? Because I had this impression that like he just like didn't, and then he just like did it naturally, or like would either read the textbook, or just he could just like sit in a lecture. And I know that his process was much more active. Like he was linking things, he was linking things to previous knowledge, and he had some good, some help. He went to, I'm not going to give too much information, but he went to a magnet school for health science careers, and he got a really great basis there. But he's just always had that desire to learn, and he relates to it in a different way than I possibly could. It was just for the sake of learning, the sake of knowing, and for the sake of helping people, that he was doing all of these things. And for me, it was a narcissistic enterprise, right? Um, and I wouldn't own that. Um, and of course, if I can tie this to the dreams that I started to have when I first entered analysis, right? The presence of the dark tower. There's a reason why this was the first image that was presented to me in the course of my analysis. And that's because that tower, right? It is high and mighty. It is above everything, right? And it is nestled away. It's that sense of like, I don't, I'm so above other people, I don't need to relate to them. And of course, in that dream too, there's that conflict, right? There's that conflict present of being at the banquet, of being at a banquet on top of this dark tower, and all of my friends being around me, but me being unable to connect to any of them, and actually feeling this very deep pain and sadness, crying, but also hiding from it all. Um, and so this is because that's the root of the problem, or the seed of the problem, this narcissistic tendency. um, that is also wherein the solution lies. And if you talk to people that are depressed, it's one of those things, they don't want to be, right. It's a conflict. They don't want to be trapped in their head all the time, because it's absolute torture. But there they remain. And so it's kind of like being able to take that objective sense of yourself and say, like, of course, like I don't want to be here, but I keep ending up back here. What is actually happening in the course of my experience? And for me, it is all kind of tied up in this too. I needed some recognition that there was something beyond me. Um, to be able to even have a sense of to be able have a sense that I could get better, and that things could go well for me. And this came in the form of, on the night that I had my deepest suicidal ideations, and was very much trying to pressure myself into acting upon them. I remember I was underneath my desk in my student apartment at UT Dallas, and I was, curled up in a ball, just sobbing. Um, and I had decided that if I was going to kill myself, that I was going to slit my wrists. And so I had a knife and I was pressing it into the corner of my elbow and was just praying for the strength, for the courage. I was like, "You fucking coward! Why can't you do it?" Um, and just sitting there, kind of like poised, like wanting to drag this knife down the length of my arm so that I could be rid of this terrible self, right? Of this atrocious self. Um, and in those moments, my phone started to ring on top of my desk, and I picked it up. It was my father. And my father, whenever he calls me, is always very chipper. It's always, "Hey, Poncho, how's it going?" That's his pet name for me, Poncho. Um, and it's always an air of jovialness, of fun, of "I'm so glad to be hearing from you," all this stuff. But his character was very different this day, and his tone was very kind of morose and low. And he said to me, I don't exactly know how what's going on, but I feel this horrible, I feel this horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I just knew that I had to reach out to you to let you know everything's okay, that I love you, and that whatever you're going through, it's gonna be okay, right? And I was very wrapped up in like a materialist reductionist point at this juncture. I was a neuroscience major, and I absolutely loved getting to learn about all of the minutia, all of the little mechanisms that happen within the nervous system that allow this experience to be realized. And so I kind of went to that sense of like, we are just like kind of a cosmic accident, and there's really nothing to be read more into that. But that happened, it knocked something loose from my conception of the world, and I was able to. It occurred to me. I was like, "There's something I don't understand about reality, and how did my father know? How did he get this visceral experience within his stomach of on the night where I was, closest to killing myself?" And that became the kind of impetus for change, right? I went to go see a counselor right after that, that the following week, and start kind of working on these issues. I got a girlfriend sometime after that too, and I kind of dropped out of the analysis. But that was the seed for me. That was where things started to be able to shift. Um, And like I said, I've gone through kind of like hills and valleys with all of this stuff. There was a time where I felt very much in my purpose. Even though I was only, I worked at Whole Foods for a little while after I got my master's, and even though it wasn't ideal, I was still kind of enjoying my life. I enjoyed the people that I worked with, and eventually got a better job and decided to go back to grad school. All this stuff. And then after in 2018, after I left on it, and after I broke up with my girlfriend of then 5 years, I was kind of back in that pit again, and I really turned to cannabis to kind of like keep me comfortable, and was trying to make moves, in terms of like I started a blog back then. It's no longer up, but I was making attempts, but that was also what kind of led me to. Uh, what led me on the call to come out to California and start studying clinical psychology and become a therapist. And so that's all to say that the thing that you cannot bear to do, or that which you find repulsive, is the thing that you need to go towards. It's that kind of like magnet action. And the depressed person, there is this overwhelming sense of just like, there is no hope. I have no potential. Um, I am unworthy. I am the most bad. I am the unworthiest of love and compassion and life. that's one of the ones that I would use on myself, that to get that masochistic pleasure was I am not even worthy of this life that I've been given, because look at how I'm spending it, right? Um, and so if you can recognize in that, and this is what's hard about working with people that are depressed, right, is that they'll be like, you're right, I'm such a narcissistic piece of shit. And it's like, no, you're a human being and you have a narcissistic viewpoint and you can't get around that. And what you need to do is begin to exercise that narcissism in a compassionate way towards yourself, and actually start to, look at the things that you admire about yourself. Yes, you've stumbled, but our stumblings, were never off the path, right? um, we need those to be able to relate to other humans. We have to, know that we're not perfect. This is again getting tied back up to all of that narcissism. You don't have to be perfect. How can you expect yourself to be perfect? Why would you ever want to be perfect? If you're perfect, that means that anything you do will put you outside the scope of being perfect. Because if you're perfect, that means that any change would mean you're not perfect. And so you have to kind of be able to make that shift in conception and consciousness, right? And understand that what is perfect is the moment, because that's all that ever exists. That's the only space that we ever occupy. We have these memories, but they're not true. Um, we can't go back in time and experience the moment as it was. They're wrapped up from our perspective. And there's nothing that we can do about that. And other than, of course, like recognize that that is the case. And so this is where where we start to be able to make a change, right? And it's hard. It is difficult to do in the very beginning, but you have to continue with it. And one of the simplest things you can do, and this is something I recommend in the article, is utilizing positive mantras, because you're so innately now able to denigrate yourself that you have to put some back pressure on this rumination cycle that you're in, because it just comes, natural as breathing for you to say, I'm a piece of shit, I'm never going to get better, and this is just how it's going to be. um, and so the best thing I can recommend to start doing right now, because this is something that you can start doing right now, regardless of where you are, whether you're deep in your addiction and that's how you're coping. You're like, I'm such a piece of shit because I'm drunk all the time. I'm drunk right now. I'm high right now, whatever it is. This is something you can start doing, and that is just giving yourself affirmations. And you have to consciously exercise these things. Um, and so that is, I am worthy. I am self-love. I am capable. I am confident. I am competent. That's the one I use the most, because I could just kind of like, it has a nice flow to it. Whenever I'm feeling out of my power, right? I am capable. I'm confident. I am competent. That's something that just say those things to yourself over and over again for 5 minutes, right? 2 minutes at a time. If you do that, um, that's starting the shift, and that's beginning a change within your own psyche to um, to instantiate a change. And so now you've kind of humbled yourself to the point where, like, okay, I am a human being. I am deficient in some ways. I will always be. And what a gift that is, to be able to be deficient. I don't have to be perfect. Experience itself does not depend on me in any way, because here it is. It's just here for all of us to work with and to conversate, to converse, to build whatever we would like to build out of this world. And, hopefully in a way that's in keeping with nature. Well, it has to be in way with keeping with nature, because as we're seeing, she's starting to um, give us some indications that she's going to take her territory back, i.e., the fires in California, the global climate crisis. And if we continue to kind of operate in these narcissistic, egocentric rather than ecocentric ways, then we're going to get so out of the balance that the nature is going to reclaim us, either through global calamity, natural disaster, disease, as is the case with the current situation, right, with COVID-19. um, and that's what we need to move towards. So if you're depressed, if you're suicidal, if you're suffering from addiction, um, know that whatever wherever you're at, you are a worthy human being. You deserve love, and if you can't give it from yourself, think of some figure in your life, or think of um, some. It could even be like a comic book character or a movie character. Like imagine them on your shoulder saying like, I believe in you, I know that you can do this. And of course, this is why religion has been so important throughout the ages, because if you can't give yourself love, well, maybe you can understand that you're worthy of God's love, or you're worthy of Christ's love, or Buddha's love, or Muhammad's love, Allah's love, all, Shiva's love, every and all aspect, right? This is just the universe wants you to do well. The field of experience as it is wants to see your fullest potential come to light. Um, and that's the beginning of the humbling of the ego and climbing out of that shadow narcissism that you're stuck in. And this is not a high and mighty thing. I've been there. I understand how hard it is, to climb out of that. But once you make that shift, and once you start making the practices, once you start telling yourself that you are worthy, you will do things that will make you feel worthy. You will be able to have more strength against your addiction, and understand that you're feeding the cycles, right? You're staying around the people that want you to stay stuck, because they want, because everyone wants they want that remainder. They want to stay in the status quo, um, instead of, humbling the self to say, you know what, if I were around people that really cared for my well-being, I wouldn't be doing this. This kind of goes to like rat park experiments too, right? With regards to if you put a rat in a cage, um, and give it cocaine water, it'll take cocaine until it dies. But if you put rats in a rat park and offer them any substances, they'll kind of like poke in every once in a while. But mostly they're going to be, really happy being around rats that they can play with and have sex with and have communities with. And that's the kind of view that you have to have of yourself too, is not that you are inherently bad and therefore you are now here, and so you are trapped in these repetitive cycles of trauma and unworthiness. Is that starting to shift that internal narrative will make you to like, you know what, I deserve to um, eat a healthy meal. I deserve to go for a walk in the woods, or just a walk across the city, wherever you might be, and just get a change. I deserve to access resources, and those will continue to accrue, and those will continue to compound upon each other, right? In terms of, you'll start doing the exercise, you'll start changing your diet, you'll start changing who you hang around with, um, and the light of what you might like to become will start to shine within the distance of your night sky. And that's what it's about. It's not going to happen all at once. It's going to take some time, some patience with yourself, to understand that you are just a human doing the best that you could possibly do. um, Understand that you will have pitfalls. You will return to old vices. You will return to old habits. You will return to old friends on occasion. Um, and to have compassion throughout all of that. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to, once you initiate this process, never slip, because you're going to slip. It's going to happen. Um, and that's not a reflection on you. That is a reflection on what it is to be human, and what it is to live in this culture and time. So let me just offer that to you. And of course, this is something that, if you're experiencing that working with dreams can help you with, that I can help you with, because it's a path that I've ventured down into and climbed out of, on a couple of different occasions. And so, I know some of the different routes, both into and out of the valley. and that is a fruitful darkness as well. That gets you to know your own soul, and gets you to know the dark side of human nature, and that's we cannot dispense with that. So wherever you're at in that journey, just know that if you start talking positively to yourself for 2 minutes a day, even if you just say once during a day, I am worthy, I am self love, I am capable, I am confident, I am competent. Um, if you say that once in your day, the shift is going to start to happen. And you just have to keep doing it, exercising that will to do that. Um, and I understand for, for certain groups, for certain peoples, this can be more difficult if you haven't had if you've been in a long standing low socioeconomic status. That's going to make it more difficult. If you yeah But it's not impossible. And I'll cite, I know that not everyone likes it when this gets brought in, but no matter where you are, I want to bring in Viktor Frankl on this one, because he is the one that really, I think it's the best example of our time of being in a place where the cards are really stacked against you, where your people are being exterminated, where you are seen as a literal vermin upon the face of the earth, and you're being put in a camp where you're going to um, do meaningless work until you die. And as long as you can hang on is entirely up to you. And Viktor Frankl made that choice of saying, I can choose my own experience. No one can take this away from me. And that is your sacred human power. And the only way you get rid of it is if you put it into the shadow and accept, or use it as a way to stay in the narcissistic circles that you run in, whether or not you can recognize them as such. And yeah, so moving on to suicide, and this is kind of the logical conclusion of this logic, right? Is that if I am bad, there's nothing that I can do. The thing that I want to improve is the thing that's trying to do the improving. So there's just no way that this is going to work, right? So the only option I now have is to eliminate myself, to kill myself. And and again, this is not shaming. This is not shaming people that do this. This is not shaming people that you've known who have made this choice. And as someone that contemplated that choice for many months, you know, I can speak to the comfort that it brings and the peace that it can bring of like, well, at least there's that. At least I won't have to deal with this forever. At least there's a way out. Um, and I can sympathize and empathize with the idea that that's all there is, and that there is no way that's going to get better. But just to give some insight into how common this is with folks, there's about 50,000 suicides that are completed in the United States each year. Just under more than half of them are by firearms. A third are by suffocation or by hanging, carbon monoxide poisoning, and then about an eighth by poisoning. And then there's some, kind of cutting and other methods and fall into that last category. Um, it's the second leading cause of death in people aged 10 to 34. That's across groups. That's across LGBTQ. That's across racial lines, gender lines, all of that. And some of the risk factors associated, if you're in a disadvantaged socioeconomic situation, you're more likely. If you're a young person between 10 and 24 that's part of the LGBTQ community, you're more likely to commit suicide. And one thing I really want to drive home is that 80 to 90% of people that are treated for depression show some degree of therapeutic improvement to the point where they're not suicidal or they're not depressed. and but only about half of people that experience major depressive episodes in the United States each year get treatment. Um, and so most of those suicides are going to be falling into that half of people that aren't seeking treatment. And this is something that that if you have health insurance, you should absolutely, make known to your physician, because there are usually ways in which you can get therapeutic treatment as well as pharmacological interventions. And the virtue of antidepressants, particularly when they're done in therapy, is that they do tend to make the brain more plastic. And so they kind of do this in a on a longer term schedule than say like classic psychedelics do, whether it be psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca, DMT, MDMA. These all kind of have that same sort of plastic change that occurs. With psychedelics, they just happen much more quickly. Um, and I think it's a good example to use Native American populations because they are the group that suffers from suicide the most. And this is related to what Eduardo Duran would call the soul wounds, of experiencing your culture just absolutely ripped apart, raped, degraded, genocided, nearly wiped off the face of the planet through the forced colonization. Um, and that carries repercussions for the people that are alive today that are descended from those people that were murdered and raped and had their land stolen from them and had their cultures disintegrated and put into a culture that did not honor what their kinship to the land and to their spirits and to their ancestors. And that's why Native Americans too suffer so much from drug abuse and from crime and from suicide. um, and it's very interesting to see the changes that can happen when it's framed in such a way, because the soul wound is something that does vibe with Native American beliefs and mythology. Um, and when you introduce them also to their native practices of, particularly with peyote, peyote seems to just put people back in their power. They are able to go from being an alcoholic to seeing just the insurmountable damage that they're doing to their own bodies, and um, it makes it to where reaching for what's right and what's good for them as an individual, as a community, as tribes, is just like it's like sliding down a hill. There's a motive force that it activates, and drives people towards. And so that's just to make the case for, a lot of us are kind of been uprooted from our indigenous roots. I speak about that a lot with my own experience with regards to my Celtic Gaelic nature, um, because of course that was a very rich indigenous culture, very nature based, tied to the land, to the seasons, to the times of day, and we can't get around that part of it either. We do live in this world where there are times of day, right, where there are seasons, cycles of how these things go, and that is not inconsequential. And in fact, there is a mirror internal experience of that quote unquote external experience that's occurring. Um, and I wanted to talk about kind of some metaphysical ideas of suicide, and I'm going to use the Catholic, the Catholic conception of suicide and where they're coming from, with regards to that. And I had the same sort of idea around it too. I was like, you're going to not be compassionate towards people that kill themselves, that are in this deep pain. And especially as someone that experienced that pain, I was like, how could you be so cold and callous as to say like people that kill themselves go to hell and it's a mortal sin? um it just seemed very lack of compassionate. And I'll bring in Dante Alighieri on this one, the famous poet that wrote the Divine Comedy, the most famous of which is the Inferno. And I bring in Dante because he really did go on, an inner journey with all of these things, and he encounters the wood of the suicides, and I believe it's in the eighth circle. It might be in the seventh circle, but as you descend through hell, there's 9 circles, and the deeper you go, the more egregious are the crimes against God, against nature. with, being outside the gates, being in limbo, being like unbaptized babies and atheists and pagans, down to the ninth circle, which is where Lucifer is held, and Judas, and as in addition to some other folks, but where betrayal seems to be the real the real sin, right? Um, but the wood of the suicides is pretty close to that, and I think that there is a reason for this. Of course, with people and with doctrinism and with dogma, it's of course like don't do it. It's the worst thing you can do, and shame on you should you ever consider that or ever do that. And be afraid because you're going to go to hell if you kill yourself. But as always, I always feel that these things are much more useful if you look at them through a more phenomenological lens, and not as like an articulation of actual reality, but as an articulation of archetypal reality, or the kind of field that we live in. And so while I definitely am disgusted by the people that preach this stuff, and that say that you're going to hell if you kill yourself, what I want to articulate here is the mode, and this is tying it all together with regards to the narcissistic piece, is that if you kill yourself, you have made the final decision in how existence is. You have essentially taken the role of God in your own experience and said, nope, I'm ending it here. I'm making this decision. I know best. I know that there's no way I'm going to get better. And so I'm going to kill myself. And I think that's really the reason why it's described as a mortal sin, and why Dante puts it in the seventh or eighth circle in his conception of hell. Is not because it's meant to shame you. You should not, it's um, shame as a motivator, I think, it can work well in certain capacities, but this is really what it's striving at, is that you've made the decision. You've put yourself in the role of God. You've made the strongest stand of the ego. The ego says, nope, I know best, and there's no way I'm ever going to get better, no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I change. I'm not even capable of change, so I'm going to kill myself. That's why I think it's conceptualized that way. And it's, again, just I articulate all of this so that it can strike us just how narcissistic, how egotistic it is to hold yourself in such a position, and to not open yourself up to a wider wisdom, and to think yourself capable of being helped. So and again, not to shame, not to cast blame, not to say, oh, you person who committed suicide, how unbelievably narcissistic of you. No, I'm still holding your pain. I'm still holding the fact that you're in pain and that everything feels so hard, and that you probably tried in the past too to get better and it just hasn't worked out. But I'm going to hold the line and say, you need to own your power. You need to open yourself up to the idea that there is something that you're doing that's contributing to the circumstances that you find yourself in. Even if there are societal forces at play, there is room to move around, and you are certainly not in the space that Viktor Frankl is in. Even if you are a Black American, if you're a Black American male in this country, who is arguably the most overlooked, most demonized, and just most dangerous person to be in the United States of America. There's a lot of hope for you, and this culture is open to changing, as we have seen over the past 200 years. It may not be perfect, it may not be enough, but change has happened, and it has happened through the combined efforts of Black Americans, white Americans, all Americans. And I'll use David Foster Wallace here as a final example, because David is I'm so sad he's gone. Um, he is just an absolutely brilliant writer, infinite jest, and all of his writings are just strike me in a way that other writers don't. His writing is simultaneously like the most intellectual and just like beautifully stated, and no one's writing makes me laugh like his writing does. And in Infinite Jest and This Is Water, he talks, it seems like he has the right idea, right? You need to know what it is that you need to know how to think and what to think about and exercise a choice in what and how you think. Um, and it seemed like he really had a hold on this, and I know it's something that he struggled with his whole life. I believe he struggled pretty horribly with depression starting from the age of 14. And I think that there's some reasons for that. I know that that he developed quite he developed slower than most other boys did. He was a pretty good tennis player at the time, and of course, once his peers started to develop physically, he fell behind there. And there's of course the ego aspects of like the girls aren't interested in someone that still looks like a little boy, even though you're the same age as everyone else. You might even have like this intellectual capacity that stretches beyond. That stretches beyond what most people your age are capable of, and yet no one's interested in that. They're more interested in the men that are more interested in the boys that are more developed, that have the bigger muscles, that are tall. And I think that that's pretty apparent why David Foster Wallace suffered from such a profound sex addiction. He is quoted as saying, I think the reason God put me on this earth is to put my penis in as many vaginas as possible. um, and yeah, of course, DFW, I think he also had some tremendous narcissistic issues, right? In terms of like that drove him to have this like incredible intellect, because his writing is not just about life and about addiction and how to put yourself in a position to make the kind of choices that you would like to make about your experience, but also covers things like the weirdness and embryonic state of a cruise ship, or trans infinite math, right? Like these are things that I'm just like, the way that he can articulate them and the way that he understands them are beyond my capacities or desire to know. um and I think that his this big tome, Infinite Jest, is kind of indicative of that too. I don't think it was his sole motivation for writing it, but he's had some a pretty visible visible conflict with memoirist Mary Carr. And Mary, I know that you get brought in reference to David Foster Wallace all the time. I want to hold up your virtue as an author and as a beautiful writer and thinker all on your own. But this is, of course, about suicide and narcissism, and who better really to talk about that than David Foster Wallace, who I believe struggled with these narcissistic issues, and ultimately completed suicide by hanging in I believe it was 2008. Um, and so he was partially motivated, and I believe he's quoted as saying this, that the Infinite Jest was a kind of way to like get Mary Carr to notice him, particularly after he'd just been batshit crazy, and displaying all of the signs of patriarchal aggression so that are so well documented and well articulated today. Um, and it was it's that same kind of thing. Like I love David Foster Wallace, and at the same time I'm kind of disgusted by his behavior. um and that striving to get admiration and love from somewhere beyond himself, and I think he did that mostly through his intellectual activity and through sex, right, and through feminine attention. um I think that's related to, this is just pure speculation, maybe a little bit of popular psychology, right? But I can't disband the way that he grew up, um, and how his life ended up being. And yeah, and he really does articulate it so well. I think he gives such a great way to be compassionate towards those that commit suicide in his book Infinite Jest, where he talks about how it's not like it doesn't really feel like a choice with suicide. The way he puts it is that people that commit suicide are like people in the towers on 9/11, where there's this conception or perception that they are in a burning building and they have either the choice to jump and end it quickly or suffer being burned alive. I think that's such a beautiful way to articulate that, and I think that so so accurately depicts the phenomenological or the lived experience of people that suffer from depression, that suffer from suicidal ideation, and that ultimately commit suicide, is this feeling of jumping from a burning building. Um, and I think that's a compassionate lens. And then again, I also want to be firm about staying in your power and understanding that, the building may be burning, but maybe there is a way out. You know what? Maybe there isn't a way out. I think for some people, maybe for some people, that is the way out. But we do have lots of resources available that can be helpful, no matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter what resources you have. There are ways to reach out, and that's you're letting your family circle know that I've been struggling with this. I feel unworthy. Telling your friends, if you have no friends, calling the National Suicide Hotline, 1-800-273-TALK or 1-800-273-8255, and just reaching out and saying, I cannot bear this. I'm going to kill myself. And I need help. I need help. That's a resource that's available to everyone, that will always be there. And in addition to the hotline, there are also warm lines, which are growing in popularity and access across this nation. I'll link to a warm line directory in the show notes here. And just start developing your inner resources, start developing your capacities, start developing your love for the world, find out what it is that you want to be in love with, and grow in that field, grow in a discipline, grow in a skill, and find out where in the world can you contribute and make a positive difference in the world. Something that was very helpful for me is the book Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. I think that's really what's required in any sort of existence, just radically accepting what is, not as a way to say like, oh, it's okay, that's the way it is, but saying like, this is how it is. And having that sort of awareness, having that sort of acceptance of the present moment, not so that you can condone it, but so that you can make the most informed decision and the best decision you can moving forward. And then, of course, find groups, find a therapist. There are low fee and sliding scale therapists around. There are clinics. Clinics are a little bit more wrapped up in the kind of Medicare managed care system, and are going to have an emphasis on behavioral treatments and on medication. But that's definitely better than nothing. And of course, there are those therapists out there that know how to work with depressed individuals that do offer low fee sliding scale. And and wherever you're at, there's people at every level of society that suffer from these things. It has been called a so-called disease of affluence. So whatever you're able to contribute. And take this with a huge grain of salt. I don't recommend this for people that don't have any support systems, that are actively mentally ill, particularly in psychosis, if you have bipolar 1, 2 disorder. Um, but um, but if you have a stable support system, if you have stable housing, um, and you are able to and you're open to experiencing, I believe that psychedelic medicine can be helpful, particularly under the watch of a guide. And don't ever do these things alone, particularly if you're depressed. Have someone there with you, someone that you trust, and be prepared to delve into the mire or the miasma of whatever it is that's ailing you, and to open your heart to that and be curious about it. Um, have mantras available for yourself when things get hard. It could be that same mantra of I am worthy, I am self love, I am capable, I am confident, I am competent. Um, and and do that work. But again, that's if you have stable housing, if you're not in a particularly dangerous, if you're not, if you're not actively suicidal, if you have support, if you have resources, that can be a good way to get out of the ruminative patterns that you find yourself in. Um, and use that with a very grain of salt. It's not something I'm recommending outright. I just know it's something that has been very helpful for me. If there's any interest, I can definitely go into those experiences more so. But yeah, that's what I can offer today. I will link to all of these things in the show notes. I will link to the article that I wrote on this, and I hope this was helpful. If you're suicidal, reach out. There are people that want to help you. There are people that want you to live, even if you may not. So thank you guys for listening. Until next time, bye.